Hilchos Beis Habechirah Perek Shlishi, the laws of the chosen house, the holy temple, chapter 3. 2 days ago in chapter 1, the Rambam told us that besides for the structure, the building of the holy temple, there was also Shiva Kelim. We had to make 7 utensils or 7 articles that were used in the service of the temple. The first 2 were the Mizbeach and the Kevesh, the outside altar for sacrifices and its ramp, which we discussed at length at the end of chapter 1 and all of chapter 2 yesterday. Today we do the other ones, the other Kelim, the Menorah, the Shulchan, the table for the showbread, the Mizbeach Hazav, the golden altar that was inside for the incense, and the Kiyar and its base, that was the wash basin. It's really an exciting chapter, it's a fun chapter to learn, and there's just, again, a wealth of commentary from the Rebbe, and I can't wait to give over as much as I can to you in the time that we have for today's class. So let's get right into it. Halacha Aleph. Menorah mefureshest tzurasa b'Torah. Says the Rambam, the Menorah was unique in that its form is explicit in the Torah. Torah details exactly how to make it and how it should look. Now for the Rambam, this is a bit of a puzzling line, because we're about to get 2-3 halachas where he's going to describe this form that the Menorah has to take. So why do we have to get that headline, that the Menorah has its form explicit in the Torah? Besides the fact that, as some of the commentaries point out, not all the details that Rambam gives us are clear in the Torah. The general form, most of the details are in the Torah, but some of them are not mentioned, and we have them only from tradition. So why does the Rambam see fit to write this line? The Rebbe once discussed this, and he said, the typical yeshiva answer that you give for these questions is that it's very relevant. There's a real practical ramification. If somebody consecrates a woman on condition that this is true or not, that can make the kiddushin, the consecration, valid or not. So you have to know that the Menorah has an explicit form in the Torah, so that if somebody consecrates a woman, he gives her a ring and he says, "You're my wife," on condition that the Menorah has an explicit form in the Torah, now we know that it's going to be a good kiddushin, a good consecration. But that's more of a corny answer that you give only when you have to. The Rebbe says there's actually a much deeper halachic ramification, which ties into something we're going to learn about way at the end of the Rambam. In his 14th book, there's a section of laws called Hilchos Mamrim. And that's basically a sage who argues on the rest of the sages. Everything used to be resolved by the high court. Today we have many arguments and debates, but the way it used to work was that the high court of 71 judges sat in the temple, and any issue that was brought to the lower courts, if they couldn't resolve it, it was brought to the higher court and it was resolved. No arguments ever persisted within the Jewish people, except within that court. What happens if within that court, one of the judges believes that the pshat of a certain thing is a certain way? So he's allowed to express his opinion. But once the majority decides, and the halacha is ruled in accordance with the majority, he must submit to everybody else. What if he doesn't? And he goes out and he teaches and he wants people to act based on his ruling in contradiction to the rest of the judges. That's called a zaken mamre. That's called an elder who rebels, and there's a special law. We kill him in public to show that nobody should dissent with the core of Torah Shabbal Peh, with the oral tradition as it's handed down through the Holy High Court. The thing is that a zaken mamre only qualifies as a zaken mamre if he is arguing about something which is not explicit in the Torah. It has to be something for which you require the oral tradition. If it's a matter that's clear in the Torah, then his argument has no substance to begin with, because you can't argue on what's clear in the Torah. So this is the message, says the Rebbe, that the Rambam is teaching us here. It's important to know that the Menorah has an explicit form in the Torah, because now we know that a zaken mamre is not considered to be a rebellious elder if he argues on the form of the Menorah, because he's simply arguing on something explicit in the Torah. Now, there's a little more to the story, because a zaken mamre, also one of the conditions over there is that he has to be arguing on something which could lead to an obligation to bring a sin offering. This seems to be more of a theoretical argument. The form of the Menorah has no bearings on sin offerings. So therefore the Rebbe says now we have to bring in the yeshiva answer that I mentioned before about consecrating a woman. That if a person consecrates a woman and he says, "I'm betrothing you on condition that I am not a zaken mamre, I am a member of the high court, but I'm not a rebellious elder," if it turns out that he did have an argument about the form of the Menorah, he's not a zaken mamre, because the Menorah is explicit in the Torah, and therefore his argument is of no substance. Hence his condition was a good condition. He betrothed the woman on almanas on condition that he's not a zaken mamre. It turns out he's talking about a zaken mamre, and therefore she would be mekudeshes, she would be betrothed in that case. So it's very important for the Rambam to communicate to us this halacha, even as he's going to delineate it But first and foremost, we should know that the menorah is one of those things that goes into the class of things that are explicit in the Torah. And now that we have that introduction, let's get into the details of the menorah's form. It says the Rambam, and he begins by discussing the middle branch of the menorah. V'arba gvim u'shnei kaftayrim u'shnei prachim hayu b'knei ha-menorah. There were 4 goblets, 2 knobs, 2 balls, and 2 flowers, flower-like shapes, on the main branch of the menorah. Shenemar, as it says in the verse, uva menorah arba gvim. On the menorah, which means on the main branch and the middle branch of the menorah, there were 4 goblets, mishukadim, which were designed with almond-like designs, kafteireha upracheha, with its knobs in the plural and its flowers also in the plural, which means there was 4 of these, at least 2 of the balls and 2 of the flowers. Now, of course, if you look at the picture, you'll see a bunch of other little knobs over here, and there seems to be another flower down here. The Rambam is only referring right now to this part of the branch up top and over here. If you add up the amount of goblets and balls and flowers from here and here, you get 4 goblets, 2 balls, and 2 flowers. In addition, there was a 3rd flower that was right near the bottom of the menorah, shenemar, as it says, ad yerecha, ad pircha. The menorah had to be 1 piece of gold all the way until the bottom, all the way until its flower. Torah makes a mention of a special flower, that's the one down over here. There was a 3rd flower on the main branch of the menorah, all the way at the bottom. Halacha Beis, v'shalish raglayim hayula. It also had 3 legs. This is an element not clear in the Torah, but we have from tradition that there was 3 legs holding up the menorah. Ushleisha kaftoirin acherais hayu b'knei menorah. In addition, there were 3 other balls, also situated on the main branch of the menorah, but not so much serving the branch as much as they were serving for the branch offs. Shemehen yotzin sheisha sakanim shleisha mitzad zeh shleisha mitzad zeh, from which emerged the 6 branches, 3 on this side and 3 on the other side. Uvechol kana v'kana mehen, on each of the branching off branches, the other 6, there were shleisha gvim, v'kafter, v'ferach. There was 3 goblets, 1 ball, and 1 flower. And now the Rambam says, v'hakol mishukadim. Everything, all of the knobs and the balls and the goblets and the flowers, all of it was mishukadim, was designed with almond-like designs, shkedim ba'asiyasam, with the appearance of almonds as they were made. When they were fashioned with these intricate designs. This is a picture of the menorah built by Machon HaMikdash, the Temple Institute in Jerusalem. We'll soon get to more detail on that. They have a round menorah, famously the Rambam and the Rebbe always talked about the straight menorah. We'll get to that later. But you can see over here, the goblets and the balls and the flowers are not just pieces. They're all designed, engraved with different types of designs. And the Rambam is of the opinion that all of them were designed. And this has raised a tremendous, tremendous issue with the Rambam's opinion. Because, let's go back to this verse over here. The Talmud says, in Tractate Yuma, that there are 5 verses in the Torah that have a word that we don't know how to read. We don't know if it belongs with the first part of the sentence or the second part of the sentence. And one of those verses is this verse right over here. Where does this mishukadim, this word which means designed with almond-like designs, which part of the sentence does it belong to? Do we read the verse, Uva menorah arba gevim mishukadim? On the menorah there were 4 goblets that were designed with these designs, comma, plus kafteireha ufracheha, plus the knobs and the flowers, which weren't designed like almond-like designs. Or perhaps the comma is after the word gvim. Uva menorah arba gvim, comma, on the main branch of the menorah there were 4 goblets, mishukadim kafteireha ufracheha, whereas the knobs and the flowers were designed with almond-like designs, in which case the goblets were not designed like almond-like designs. So the Talmud says we don't know how to read this. We don't know if the mishukadim goes on the goblets or on the knobs and the flowers. So that seems to be the source for what the Rambam is saying. Since we don't know how to read the verse, so out of doubt, we just design them all. I mean, what could be wrong, right? If you don't make the designs, if you err on that side, you might be making a real mistake. Torah may have dictated to make a design on this thing and you didn't do it. But if you just do it to all of them, what's wrong? Looks nice, it's fine. But the Mishnah Lamelech, one of the primary commentators on the Rambam, asks a major question. This doubt over here is only when it comes to the middle branch, right? The verse is talking about Uva menorah, which the Rambam himself interpreted to be meaning the middle branch. That's where we're not sure if the designs go on the goblets or also on the balls and on the flowers. But when it comes to the other branches, the only time the Torah says mishukadim is clearly on the goblets. Shleisha gevim mishukadim, v'kaneh ha'echad. It says there's 3 goblets with designs on each branch, plus kaftar v'ferach, plus a ball and a flower. So you want to tell me that on the middle branch they did it on both because of the doubt, fine. But the Rambam writes the words v'hakol mishukadim after delineating all the goblets and all the balls and all the flowers, as if to imply that the balls and the flowers also on the other branches were also designed with the almond-like designs. How did you get that? Where'd you get that from? Only the middle branch, maybe, but not the other ones. So the Kiryas Sefer answers, he says, the truth is that it's not only this verse over here that we're talking about that has the contradiction. If you look at the other verses, there's also a contradiction. There's also ways to imply that the balls and the flowers should have almond-like designs. And therefore, we make them all. Same thing. We do them all, just, why not? Err on the side of caution and make them all designed. But the Rebbe says, no, that's a very big doichak. It's a very forced interpretation. In multiple places, it's clear that the doubt is only in this verse, which pertains to the middle branch. The Masir Keach, another commentator here on the Rambam, says, you know what, you're right. The doubt is only in the middle branch. But once out of the doubt, you're making all the things on the middle branch designed, so all the branches in the menorah should look uniform, it should be symmetrical, make them all with the same designs. The Rebbe says on that, tzarich iyun gadol. This requires great analysis to say such a big chidush, that out of a doubt, you went 2 steps. You made the balls and the ball and the flower on the middle one design, and then you took that and made all of them with a design. Another answer the Masir Keach gives is that indeed, the Rambam writes v'hakol mishukadim after everything, but he only means it to be referring to the middle branch. And that's obviously a very, very forced interpretation. If you can say something better, say something better. The Rebbe takes an incredibly novel approach to this. But we have to back up for a second. And we have to ask a question. How could the Torah communicate something which is relevant to Jewish law in a way that's unclear? There are many verses in the Torah that we don't exactly know how to read, but those are all theoretical. There's no practical difference. Here, you have a verse that if I don't know how to read it correctly, I'm going to end up designing one or the other. How could the Torah give something to begin with in an unclear fashion? So clearly, the logical thing to say is that initially when the Torah was given, there actually was clarity in this verse. And the doubt only arose later on in Jewish history. And that's really, really difficult to understand. Because when exactly did the doubt arise? The moment Moshe Rabbeinu got the commandment on Mount Sinai, he fashioned the Menorah. In fact, the first Menorah was fashioned by God, according to many opinions, even whether that's halachic is another question. But definitely it was there since the beginning of the tabernacle's building. It stood in the temple. Kohanim saw it every day. They lit it every single day. According to the Rambam, twice a day. Sometimes even non-Kohanim got to see it. It says in Halacha they used to bring it out, sometimes on holidays. So obviously there was never a moment in time when they didn't know how the menorah looked. The only time you could possibly suggest is maybe when they went to Babylon. After the first temple was destroyed, during those 70 years, they had a doubt. But again, during those 70 years, people lived through the entire 70 years who had seen the first temple. And it doesn't say anywhere that the menorah had to change from the first to the second temple. We don't find anywhere in Halacha that the doubt arose for the second temple when they weren't sure to build it. So what are you going to say? That it came later? After the second temple, the doubt arose. In the times of the Tanoim, they were still able. They had people that were witness to the second temple. And also, you can't make a halacha based on a doubt that arose after the Churban. The Rambam is ruling about the menorah itself. And he isn't just ruling about the menorah in the future, the third Beis HaMikdash. He's talking about the menorah in the second temple. So when exactly did the doubt happen? There was always something that would contribute to complete clarity in how the menorah was constructed. So the Rebbe says, you know what? The opposite is true. The very first menorah that was constructed by Moshe Rabbeinu was hakol mishukadim. All of it was designed in a way of almond designs, every single part of it. They did it because that was the halacha. When the Talmud says there's a doubt how to read it, that's exactly what it is. It's just a doubt how to read it. Whether mishukadim goes this way or that way. But halachically, mishukadim went both ways. Why is that? Because mishukadim, says the Rebbe, is not a law that dictates the form of the menorah. It's a law that dictates the style that was used to approach the design of the menorah. It was a much more general concept. Mishukadim is the idea that there's an instruction that when you build a menorah, it should be in the most beautiful way. So however you read the verse, whether Mishukadim mainly applies to the goblets, or it also applied to the balls and the flowers, it was an approach thing. It was a design thing that was meant to apply to the entirety of the menorah. It's one menorah. Why should there be a difference? If I want to make it beautiful on this branch, I'll make it beautiful on the other branches too. Torah communicated Mishukadim only in one area, what's called the Lamed ala Klal Kulai, to teach about the entire principle, the entire menorah. Because once you're saying it should be beautiful, it's got to be beautiful completely. In other words, you can use more of halachic terminology. Once Mishukadim was introduced as a law in beautifying the menorah, we have a rule that says, Zeh keli ve'anvehu. Everything related to mitzvah has to be beautiful. You buy a talis, make it a nice talis. You buy a lulav, make it a nice lulav. You have a menorah, make a nice menorah. It has to be nice completely. So therefore, since the very first menorah from Moshe Rabbeinu already had Mishukadim in every single part, that's what the doubt was. They could never clarify, tell me, did you make the design on the goblet, because that was the main halacha, and then the balls and the flowers was the secondary one, or the design on the balls and the flowers, that was the main one, and the goblets was the secondary one. That people forgot. That only the designers knew. That the sages couldn't be mevayer, they couldn't exactly figure out. And the doubt remained only in how to read the verse. But the menorah itself was completely mishukadim, because that was the way it had to be made to express the beauty of doing the mitzvah. Just an amazing, amazing sikha. I'm communicating it only in short. Check it out in Chelek Chavav, Truma, volume 26, look at the sikhas. Unbelievable stuff. At any rate, says the Rambam Halacha Gimel. Nimtzu, it turns out, if you follow the math, you put 4 goblets on this branch, and 3 goblets on all the other branches. Nimtzu kol agvim shnayim ve'esrim. We now have 22 goblets. V'haprachim tisha. The flowers are 9, because there's one on each branch, plus a second one on the main branch, plus a third one also on the bottom by the base. V'hakafteirim achadasar. And there were 11 balls. 7 on the top of the branches, 3 over here for the branch offs, and 1 over here on the bottom. The kولן מעכבין זה זה, and they are all essential. אפילו אחד מן השניים והארבעים מעכב את כולן. Not just within the sets. Everything, all 42 implements to the menorah here were essential to them all. If one of them is missing, the whole thing is disqualified. Halacha daled b'med dvarim amurim b'sha'asa'u azav. When do we say that? When they made the menorah out of gold, as it's originally communicated in the Torah. Torah says it should be gold. If you make it gold, you have to have all these additional designs on it. Aval shashar minei matches, but if they made it out of any other metal. As we saw in chapter 1, that if the community was too poor, they didn't have to make it out of gold, it could even be out of tin. If they made the menorah out of other metals, ein oisin bagvim kafteirim uprachim, we do not make the goblets and the balls and the flowers. The Rebbe said this is a chidush gadol. This is a very big novelty of the Rambam to say this, that the form which is explicit in the Torah only applies to gold. But nevertheless, the Rambam does say that. So, if it was gold, it had to have all these things. Not gold, didn't have to have it. V'chein, so too, the other details in the Torah. Menorah haba hazav, only the menorah which is made out of gold, tiya kula kikar im nereiseha, needs to be completely made out of a talent of gold. That was a weight measurement together with the top parts, which served as the lamps. The tiya kula miksha mino ashases, and had to all be hammered out of one piece of gold. Whereas if it was made out of any other metal, ein makpidin al mishkala, we don't care about the weight. And even if it was hollow, it's also kosher. Halacha hey, either way, whichever metal you use, we never make it out of scrap metal. Whether it was gold or any other metal, scraps are not for use in the Beis HaMikdash. But whether it had to be out of one piece, that's only miksha, it's called miksha in the Torah, that's only for gold. The weight, only for gold, not for other metals. Halacha vav, hamelkachayim behamachtes, ukle hashemen, the tongues and the scoops and the oil holders, einan miklal hakikar. Those did not go into the measurement of the talent. I didn't clarify it before, but maybe I should do it right now. The Torah says that the weight of the menorah has to be kikar zahav tar, 1 talent of gold, of pure gold. So the question is, does that encompass all the tools that were also used with the menorah? The Rambam says no. The tongs that were used to scoop out the wicks and the scoops that were also used to clean out the little cups and the cups themselves that were used to hold the oil, those didn't count towards the talent. How do I know? Because the Torah says about the menorah, zahav tar, has to be out of pure gold. And there's another verse, then it says again, the tongs and the scoops should be pure gold. Which means that they're separate. The menorah is 1 unit of gold, and the tools are another unit of gold. Why doesn't it say that the lamps, The top part has to be out of pure gold, because those lamps were actually set into the menorah. They weren't placed in as a separate piece. They were attached, they were part of the original talent of gold. So you basically end up having what you see on this picture here, which is the branches, right, with the goblets and the knobs and the flour. And then on the top, there was this little container that's called the neder, the actual lamp, where the oil was put into, and that was included into the kikar, the general talent of gold. Halacha zayin, shivas knei menorah ma'akvin zeh. The 7 branches of the menorah are essential to one another. You have to have all the branches, can't have less. The 7 lamps on the top, those actual pieces that were set into the menorah, had to also be there, all of them. They were all essential to one another. That whether it's gold or other metals, this law is the same. The Rambam repeats, the top lamps were set into the branches. The 6 lamps that were set into the 6 branches that were exiting off the main branch of the Menorah, kولן פניהם לנר האמצעי שעל קנה המנורה. They all had to face towards the middle lamp that is on the main branch of the Menorah. That's how some texts of the Rambam have it here, she'al knei, that is on the knei with a hey, the main branch of the Menorah. Other texts has l'ner ha'emtzai shel knei, and in that case knei would be with a yud, the middle lamp of the branches of the Menorah. But the point is the same. Either way, they had to be facing the middle branch. How do you face the middle branch? So the commentaries explain that it doesn't mean the actual lamps, but it means the wicks. When they lit the Menorah, they would move the wicks to face the middle one. And the middle one would be faced towards the Holy of Holies, which was in back of it towards the west. And it's the middle branch that is called the Ner Ma'aravi, the western lamp. Many halachas relate to the western lamp. We're going to see later in this book how they would clean the menorah with the western lamp. The Rambam says the western lamp in this context is the middle lamp because it was moved towards the west, facing towards the Holy of Holies. There's an interesting issue the commentaries raised. The Torah says, El mul pnei ha-menorah ya'iru shivas haneros. All 7 lamps have to face towards the middle. The Rambam seems to be saying only the 6 face towards the middle. The middle is just the middle. And the Rebbe explains that, the middle one shines towards itself. Basically, it just has to be centered. And then it's also considered to be shining towards the middle of the menorah. Talking about this halacha of facing towards the middle, there's a homiletic way, drush, a way to explain this halacha, that the Menorah represents Torah. The 6 branches represent the 6 orders of the Mishnah, the core of the oral tradition. The middle branch represents Torah Shebiksav, the written Torah, which was embodied in the luchos and the tablets of stone, which were actually right behind the menorah in the Holy Ark in the west, which is why the middle one faced west. And the idea being that the Torah Shebiksav has to be the guide for the rest of Torah. When you study Torah with your logic and you apply your own head and your own brain and your own questions to it, you have to all be facing the middle. You got to make sure that you're in line with the truth. You're not allowing your brain to take you places that are completely off and veering from the truth. They have to always be focused and centered on the core, on what is the real deal. Halacha tests. Let's get into the details of the design. We keep on mentioning the goblets, the balls, the flowers. What exactly do they look like? Hagviyim, says the Rambam, these goblets, doimin lekoisis Alexandria. They were similar in shape to the cups you find in Alexandria in Egypt. Shepihen rachav, b'shulehen katzar. Where their mouth, their opening was wider, and their bottom was narrower. And here we have a wonderful sikha from the Rebbe, and this is based on a picture that we have from the Rambam himself. This is a picture of the Rambam's own handwriting. He drew this menorah to reflect his understanding of how the menorah looked. And look what he did. With the goblets, he made them upside down. Because he describes them as triangular. They're narrow on the bottom, wide on the top. Where's the wide part? Here, the wide part is on the bottom. That means, according to the Rambam, the goblets were flipped on the menorah, which seems to go against logic. I mean, if you say a goblet is a goblet. You hold the cup, right? Here's the cup. You hold the cup in the proper way. Why would the Rambam make it upside down? And it's not a mistake. He made it 22 times, right? There's 22 goblets on the menorah. That means he made a mistake 22 times. Absolutely not. Obviously, the Rebbe says that this is how the Rambam understands it, even though we don't have a clear source for this in earlier texts. But the Rambam either had a tradition like this, he maybe found a text that was lost to us, where it says clearly, and that's how the goblets were actually shaped. And the Rebbe says it actually makes sense. We could explain it using the core element of the menorah, even though in the rest of Torah we like to say what's called derech gedilasan. Things should be held or used the way they grow. The lulav, the esrog, we have to hold them upright. The wooden beams that were used for the Mishkan had to stand the way they grew. So how come over here it's upside down? Because the whole idea of the Menorah, the Talmud says, La'oira nitzarich, you think Hashem needs light in the temple? No. The Menorah wasn't for light. The Menorah was to light up the world. The Menorah was to serve as a testimony to the rest of the world that the Shekhinah rests among Israel, the divine presence rests among Israel, which means that the Menorah in its whole purpose was from the inside out, was to give outwards. And therefore, the same applied to the goblet. What's a goblet? A goblet is a way that we can hold liquid, and it can help us. Right? Liquid is not meant to stay in the goblet. Liquid is meant to enter your mouth. And when it enters your mouth, what shape does the cup take? An upside down shape. That's when it's doing its job. And therefore, since the menorah as a whole was meant to be pouring outward, so the goblets were on the menorah in a shape of pouring outward. And that's a very important lesson for every Jew. We have to also be those goblets, turned over with a wide opening towards the outside. For yourself, you might skimp, you might cut corners, you might not have to give yourself all the grandiose treatment. But when you're giving to others, you got to do it all the way. By the way, the Rambam draws the cups, besides for the fact that they're upside down, the bottom is actually so narrow that it can't stand this way. Almost as if the message is, you got to be fully devoted to the outside. On your own, you won't be able to stand. Only when you become part of the menorah, you fix yourself onto the menorah, and you do your job, then you'll have a lasting existence. A Jew is a menorah too. We have to be giving to others and giving to others fully. That's the design of the cups. The hakaftorim. Says the Rambam, the balls kamin tapuchim beireisiyim, are like the apples that you find in Beirut in Lebanon. Shehin arukin ma'at. They're a little bit elongated, a little bit oval-like. Kibeitza shashnei rashe akadin, like an egg whose two ends are flat. So it's not an exact sphere, although many of the pictures draw an exact ball, somewhat of an elongated oval, a little bit. The haprachim and the flowers are kemay pirchei ha'amudim, are like the flowers that we have on tops of pillars. Shehin kemay kaira usfasa kfula lachutz, like a bowl with the lip turned outwards. Actually, over here in the Chabad, we have these, right? These pillars over here. We have these little designs coming out of it, kind of like flower-like things. And I guess here it's more split into different parts, but it was like, think of like a bowl with the lip turned outside. I'll just use this picture again from the Machon HaMikdash. You get a little bit of a closer look. You can see over here. Up top, they make this flower-like design, things coming outwards. The point is that's what the flower at the Torah means. Halacha Yud, Goiva HaMenorah, Haya Shmoina Asar Tefach. The height of the menorah was 18 tfachim, 18 handbreadths. And the Rambam will walk us through it. Haraglayim ba'aperach, shleisha tfachim. The feet, the base with the flower, that was 3 tfachim, 3 handbreadths. Ushnei tfachim chalak, then there was 2 tfachim on the main branch there, empty. V'tefach shaboy gavia kafter v'ferach. Then there was 1 tefach, which contained a goblet, a knob, and a flower. V'tifchaim chalak, and then 2 more handbreadths of blank, of empty. V'tefach kafter. Then there was 1 tefach taken up by this ball, ushnei kanim yetzin mimenu, echad helach ve'echad helach, and there was 2 branches going out of it, one this way and one that way. V'nim shachin ve'oilin keneged goiva hamenorah. They pulled themselves upwards, all the way matching to the height of the main branch. And I'll give some commentary on that in a second. V'tefach chalak, continuing up here, there was 1 tefach of empty space. V'tefach kafter, the next tefach was taken up by another ball. Ushnei kanim yetzin mimenu echad helach ve'echad helach, with 2 branches going up from it, one up, one this way, one that way. V'nim shachin v'oilin keneged goiva hamenorah, also continuously rising until the height of the main branch. V'tefach chalak, then there was another handbreadth of empty space. V'tefach kafter, and another tefach taken up by the 3rd ball. Ushnei kanim yetzin mimenu echad helach ve'echad helach, with 2 branches going out, one this way, one that way. V'nim shachin v'oilin keneged goiva hamenorah, pulling themselves up all the way to the height of the main branch. Utfachayim chalak, 2 tefachs now of empty space. Nishtayru sham shleisha tfachim, that remains 3 tfachim to the top. Shabahen shleisha gviyim kafter v'ferach, which had 3 goblets, 1 ball, and 1 flower, and also the nair, which was set into the menorah. And the Rambam actually writes, V'zuhi tzurasa, this is its form. In many Rambams, they don't have the picture, but this is the picture that Rambam was referring to. The Rambam drew a picture, and he wanted to communicate to you how the form was based on everything he said. And this is what it looked like. Obviously, this is kind of crude based on the handwriting, although maybe it is specific. I know in most pictures they put the goblets all the way on the top. The Menorah in 770, which was modeled after the Beis HaMikdash, also has it this way, but the Rambam seems to imply that maybe the goblets ran down the length of the pole. That's up for debate, but the point is that Rambam actually drew the picture so we could appreciate what the menorah looked like. And now I want to return to that line over there. Nimshachin v'oilin kineged goiva ha-menorah. Nimshachin v'oilin means they pulled themselves and they rose. The Masei Choshev, a famous author, writes that this means rounded. Nimshachim va'olim, this unusual expression of pulling and rising, means that the menorah in the temple was rounded. And the Rebbe has a long sikha on this, and he really campaigned about this very much, that the Masei Choshev is incorrect. His proof is not a proof. The word kana that the Rambam keeps using and the Torah keeps using, everywhere in the Torah, kana means a straight pole. And besides the fact, the Masei Choshev only wrote what he wrote because he didn't know how to interpret the Rambam's words. But now we have a picture. We literally have a picture that the Rambam himself drew, and he draws the poles straight. So if the Masei Choshev would be confronted with this proof, he himself would retract his opinion. And the Rebbe said that we should be machzir ha-Torah liyoshna, means we should bring back authentic tradition to the way it always was, and we should campaign to only have pictures of menorahs with straight poles. Especially because on Titus's arch, which is another secular proof that the menorah was round, the Rebbe says that that's an arch that was meant to be made fun of the Jewish people. It was meant to taunt us. They weren't there for the accuracy of the depictions. It's very possible that it wasn't even the real menorah, it was a side menorah that they had in the temple. But either way, why would you copy something which was made to degrade you when you have clear halachic proof that it was straight? So the Rebbe says, really, he really wants an effort that wherever we can, we should make pictures of straight menorahs and not rounded ones. Anyway, halacha yud aleph, let's continue the Rambam. The Evan Hoysal Lifnei Menorah, there was a stone in front of the Menorah, Uba Shalish Malas, with 3 steps. Go back to that picture we had before. Here, a piece of stone with 3 steps. Upon which the Kohen would stand to use to clean out the lamps. He would put on it all the oil utensils, things that held the oil, and the tongs and the scoops, b'shas hatava, when he was preparing and lighting the menorah. The Rebbe once addressed the need for the stone. Why do you have to have this stone or the step stool? Light the menorah. You can light it from the floor. You don't have to be taller than the lamps to light it. So the Rebbe says, simple answer is because of the cleaning. The first thing you do in lighting is you clean. And to clean, you have to be able to see into the cups. Therefore, there was a stone. It doesn't say anywhere in the sources how tall the stone was, because very possibly that varied based on the height of the Kohen, or the average Kohen who was serving. There's no specific height for the stones, because depending on how tall you are, you could see from higher or from lower, and therefore it seems that the stones would change as needed. And with that we conclude the discussion of the menorah. And now we move on, Halacha Yud Beis, Hashulchan, the table for the showbread. This is the classic picture of the shulchan. Now, as we're going to see, the table was just the bottom part. That's the whole table. The rest of the stuff are accessories to the table. And we'll talk about those, but the shulchan is just this piece, the 4 legs and the board on top. HaShulchan haya arkoi shnei masar tefach v'rachbei shisha tfachim. The shulchan's length was 12 handbreadths and it was 6 handbreadths wide. V'haya munach, and it was placed arkoi le'oirech habayis v'rachbei le'roichav habayis. Its length ran parallel to the length of the temple structure, and its width ran parallel to the width of the temple structure. Now, what does this mean? The temple structure we are going to learn tomorrow was exactly square. It was 100 by 100 amas. Rather, it means the inner room. The inner room of the Kodesh was much longer than it was wider. So what we're saying is that the length of the shulchan went to the length of the room. You're looking at the room now on the length level. So the shulchan, when you would look at it, you would see its wide side, not its longer side, because its length ran parallel to the length of the temple, whereas its width ran parallel to the width of the temple. The same thing was true of all the other utensils in the temple. Their length ran with the length of the temple, and their width ran with the width of the temple. Chutz, with the exception of 2 things. Min ha'arain. First of all, the exception of the ark. Here's a picture. Its length ran against the width of the temple. This is the longer part. The front is the longer part of the aron. This is the wider, the width. And when you came in, you're looking at the length. So the length ran this way, which is the width of the temple, versus the width ran this way, which is the length of the temple. Here's another picture of the ark, same thing. The front is the length, it ran against the width of the temple. V'chein, says the Rambam, so too, neiros ha-menorah, the menorah's lamps, hayu keneged reichav habayis ben hatzafin v'hadarim. They ran north-south, like the width of the temple. So when you walked in, you would see the menorah in front of you with all 7 lamps stretched out. If you want to see it bird's eye, you can see it this way. Maybe this is actually harder to see. Let's go to that picture where we zoomed in to the temple structure. Where was that from 2 days ago? Over here. See, the shulchan runs, this is the length. So the shulchan runs length going lengthwise and width going widthwise. The menorah ran, I don't know if you can see it, it's very small, but its length went widthwise. And when you walked into the temple, you were able to see it in the front of you. Now this Rambam raises tremendous difficulty, because a simple, straightforward reading of the halacha is that the shulchan and the menorah were placed in the exact same way. There's an argument in the Talmud, whether the shulchan goes this way and the menorah goes this way, or the shulchan goes this way and the menorah goes this way. But all opinions are uniform. If the shulchan was like this, the menorah was like this. If the shulchan was like that, the menorah was like that. The Rambam rules 2 opposite opinions. The shulchan ran lengthwise, east-west, and the menorah ran widthwise, north-south. How could that be? One of the Rebbe's most genius publications is on this issue. It was discovered after his passing in his desk drawer, printed later as what's called Rishimas HaMenorah, the notes on the menorah, and it discusses at length the Rambam's opinion here, how the Rambam could take these 2 opposing opinions. I'm not going to get into the nigla, the halachic aspect of it. I'll just say that the Rebbe proves that the menorah is based on an argument between Rabbi Nosson and Rebbe. Rabbi Nosson says, or implies, that it went north-south, and you always rule like Rabbi Nosson over Rebbe, plus there's an Amayra, Rabbi Yochanan, a later rabbi who also rules in the same way, and whenever you have that, the later rabbi is accepted as the halacha. Whereas the shulchan, the Rambam goes with the simple reading of the text in the Talmud. If you follow the sugya, if you follow the discussion, the conclusion of the discussion seems to be that the shulchan went lengthwise. So the Rambam chooses them both based on 2 different texts. But the sweetest part of the publication is where the Rebbe goes into the drush, the homiletics of this halacha. And he says, and really this will become clearer in chapter 6 when we talk about this, but if we could take a look at the map of the temple, this is east, this is west. As you climbed westward, things got holier and holier. You start in the women's courtyard, it's 1 level of holiness. You rise to the Israelite courtyard, a 2nd level. You go into the Kohanim's courtyard, a 3rd level. You go between the Ulam and the Mizbeach, a 4th level. Into the Ulam, into the Kodesh, the Holy of Holies was in the west. So the east-west mode represents levels, varying levels. The north-south way implies uniformity, singularity, because there was never a point at which things got holier when you walked this way. Wherever you were, if you walked to the left or to the right, it was always the same. So the Rebbe says, therefore the shulchan was this way and the menorah was that way. Why? Shulchan represents the service in the physical, material, mundane part of life. In the mundane material part of life, everybody is different. Everybody serves with varying degrees within their physicality. And therefore the shulchan had to be positioned lengthwise, going from east to west, indicating the difference in levels between different people as they do their material service of God. The menorah represents spirituality. Torah, as I mentioned before. Torah also has different levels, but it's all Torah achas, it's all one Torah. And therefore, it had to run north-south, showing the uniformity, showing the singularity of Torah. The Rambam doesn't even use the words east-west, north-south. He uses length and width, but it's the same thing. In mysticism, when we talk about width means expanding on an idea, but always staying on the same plane. When we talk about length means hierarchy, bringing things down from level to lower level. So therefore, the shulchan went across the oirech, showing the difference in levels, and the menorah stayed on Reichav, which means the uniformity and the singularity of the given level. And I really, really suggest, with all powers of suggestion, I really recommend that you take a read. It's deep, it requires a lot of focus, this Rishimas HaMenorah, but it is unbelievable work treating the Rambam's opinion in how the Shulchan and the Menorah were positioned. Halacha Yud Gimel, the Rambam now gets into more detail on the Shulchan. Arba tznifin shel zav hayu lashulchan. There were 4 supports, I guess you would say, belonging to the table, mifutzalin meirashehen, that were split at the top, shahayu seimchin bahen shtei ha'ma'arach shelechem apanim, which were used to support the 2 rows of the showbread. Shnayim miseder zeh, ushnayim miseder zeh, 2 on each side. This is the shulchan kind of taken apart. These are the supports. Maybe it's not the Rambam, because the Rambam says they were split on top, but this is the point. This is the table, the bottom board with the legs, and they would attach these two supports to hold up the bread. They're the word here, uksaisav. Torah describes the accessories of the shulchan. It uses this word ksaisav. That's what ksaisav means, the supports. Yudalid ve'esrim u'shmeina kanim shel zav. There was in addition 28 tubes, golden tubes. These ones over here that you see floating in midair. Kol echad mehen kechatzi kan chalul. Each one in the shape of a half of a hollowed out reed. So if you have a reed and you split it in half, think of like a little thing like this. It's long. 28 of those. Arba asher l'seder zeh, arba asher l'seder zeh. 14 for one row of bread, 14 for the other row of bread. V'hena nikrain menaki yesav. That's this one. Menaki yesav literally means they clean it out. They would give the bread air to breathe so it wouldn't mold. Then you add the two spoons in which you put the frankincense on the table. Near the rows of bread. Those were called the spoons. There were spoons that held frankincense. We're going to see later in a section of laws dealing with the sacrificial procedures about how this was used. But there was spoons with frankincense that was offered every Shabbos with the showbreads. And the molds which were used to bake the breads, they are called ka'aresav, which literally means plates or bowls, but it refers to the molds in which the breads were baked. Halacha tesvav. Elu ha'arba'a asar kanim. What do you do with the 14 tubes that were there to hold up the bread? The way it worked was like this. Maybe we can use the other picture for more clarity. You put the first bread, this is the bread over here, on the actual table. And then between the first and second bread, you'd put these 3 tubes, 3 out of the 14. And then, put the next bread, and between every challah was 3 tubes. But between the 5th and the 6th, only needed 2 tubes, because there's no more. On top of the 6th, it was the top. So it didn't require so much support, only 2 instead of 3. So you have 14 on each row of breads. In the ulam, in the antechamber, right at the entrance to the actual heichal, there were 2 tables. One of them was marble, upon which they would place the showbreads as it went in on Shabbos. One was gold, they would place the showbreads on this one as it would go out on Shabbos, because every Shabbos they would switch. They would put new breads, take off the old breads, and the kohanim would eat it. So the one when it came in was on the marble, going out was on the gold. We always go up in holiness, not down. So we go from marble to gold instead of from gold to marble. And that deals with the shulchan, with the table, all things related to the table. Now the third thing, halacha yud zayin mizbeach haktoiras, the incense altar. Haya meruba amma al amma. It was square, 1 amma by 1 amma, 1 cubit by 1 cubit, about 1.5 feet by 1.5 feet. Behu nasun b'heichal. It was also in the heichal mechuvan ben tatzafin ladarim, exactly between north and south. Mashruch mi ben hashulchan b'hamenera lachutz, pulled a little bit outwards from between the shulchan and the menorah towards the outside. So we go to this picture over here again. We see the shulchan here and the menorah there. The mizbeach was in the front, pulled outwards. Ushlashtan hayu munachim mishlisha heichal v'lifnim. They were all placed on the inner third of the heichal. This would help us better here. The aerial view. You divide the heichal. All 3 utensils were in the innermost third of the heichal. Keneged apareches hamavdeles ben hakodesh uven kodesh hakadashim, opposite the curtain which divided between the holy and the holy of holies. Halacha yud ches, we conclude with the kiyar, the laver, the wash basin that was outside. Hakiyar hayol leishnei masardat. The kiyar had 12 faucets. So all the kohanim who were needed for the morning daily sacrifice could sanctify their hands and feet at the same time. As we're going to see later in Hilchos Tmidin and Musafin, there were 12 kohanim who dealt with the process of the daily sacrifice. They should all be able to wash as one. They made a pulley system attached to it, which would allow for the water to be in it constantly. Otherwise, the water, if they stayed overnight, would become disqualified. But through this pulley system, they can bring the kiyar and immerse it into live water, a water stream, and that would cause all the water to remain kosher overnight. This pulley system and the water also was completely mundane, not holy. And the reason that it was made was so the water in the kiyar shouldn't become disqualified by staying overnight, as I just explained. Because the kiyar is a holy utensil, umikadesh, and makes anything in it holy. Anything which is sanctified in a holy utensil, imlan nifsal. If it stays overnight, it becomes disqualified. And therefore this became a problem. Until somebody came and invented this pulley system which allowed them to immerse it in the water and keep the water pure from day to day without becoming disqualified.